Welcome to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Mini First Aid are the UK's leading family first aid provider, and we are delighted to bring our latest podcast series to you, giving you all the information that you need around family health subjects. Thanks for joining. Series 3 of the Family Health podcast is sponsored by Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Savlon Scar Prevention Gel speeds up healing, helps soothe pain, and reduces the likelihood of scarring when used on minor wounds, superficial burns, and grazes. And to be frank, with my 6 children in my house, cuts, scrapes, and grazes are plentiful. So my first aid kit, saviour, is Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Hello, I'm Kate, founder of Mini First Aid. Welcome to our podcast, Family Health by Mini First Aid. We're so pleased that you've taken the time to listen to our podcast, whether you're in the car, you're cleaning the house, or perhaps you're relaxing with that cuppa. That's what I'm going to do in a minute and have a cuppa. Our Family Health podcast covers a huge range of topics that might affect one of your family members. And if you've ever had a family health concern and you're thinking, I'll just Google that, well, don't. Listen to us instead. And today, I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest, Jaimie Shires. Thank you for joining us. Jaimie is an experienced counsellor and mental health trainer and is a member of the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. That's quite a title, Jaimie. Jaimie's going to talk to us today about parental anxiety. And if you're not already leaning into your speaker to listen to this, I promise you this conversation is going to be absolutely brilliant. And I know for all of us, we all experience parental anxiety to differing degrees. So, Jaimie, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming. Tell our listeners, I know lots about you from our team, but tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Right, so I'm a counsellor and a mentor, and I'm a mental health trainer. So, but I guess the easiest way to describe what I do is I help people through different stages of personal change.
Brilliant. And just, I guess, to give me some reassurance at the front end of today's conversation, is it normal to worry about our kids? Is that a normal thing?
Absolutely. It's in our wiring, we carry it in our genetics, but also there's a lot of learned behavior, I think, with regards to worrying about our children. So it's a combination of both.
It's from when they're first conceived, the worry starts, right? Why is that? As soon as we become pregnant, then the worrying starts about this little person that we're growing.
Well, I personally think it's because we're a society that tends to overthink things a lot. Of course, there's going to be a natural level of concern, as a first-time parent especially, but with every pregnancy, there's always going to be a healthy level of I guess you can say anxiety or concern. But I think more to do with the fact that we live in a society where we're constantly overthinking things, where there's a tendency to overanalyze things and to ruminate on things a lot as well, rather than just letting things go. So
why have we become a society of overthinkers? I mean, where's that come from? Is it just how we've developed as mankind? Or is it all the what's going on? What's making us all overthinkers?
So I think it's a combination of both, yeah. There's a certain level of evolutionary, like the evolution of our brain, how it's developed in itself, right? We're more cognitive thinkers, but also the way that our society is structured is very much about analysis. It's very much about constantly analyzing things, judging things, and so that causes us to... And I think also the way that we, society, the media, messages in the media, there's a lot of fear-mongering, I think, about things as well, which causes us to be constantly thinking about things.
We are bombarded, right, with constant media messaging. You can't help but have these extra things, just these extra worries and stories. And, we at Mini First Aid will, parents will say, I heard about this because I read it online or I saw it in the news. I heard about something happening to a child. And then it becomes their anxiety. And interestingly, we did some research with our first aid classes as to why people attend. And anxiety was up there. I'm worried. I am worried about my children. So yeah, I guess, like you said, it's just this evolving society, and the fact that it comes at us from every angle. We have lots of concerns about phones and social media. Are we right to be worried? What's the balance? How can we get a balance so that we're not completely bombarded with all of this stuff all the time?
Well, personally, I see things like phones and gaming and, just technology in general as just a neutral tool. So the tool itself isn't the problem. It's not what causes the anxiety. It really has to do more with a person's level of awareness who's using it. How aware is that person of and what is their intention for using it? And so I think the where things come from in terms of issues with social media or issues with phone usage or with gaming addiction and things like that is because maybe there's both a lack of self-awareness, a lack of reflection, that perhaps that child or young person or even adult has, and perhaps also a lack of emotional intelligence or emotional maturity. So as parents, it's our job to really and instill a level of self-reflection. How does that make you feel? Why do you feel you need to do that? And if we begin that pattern of self-reflection early on, and also establish good communication with our children, then that kind of usage and thing can be monitored and it can be managed healthily. Because, there's a lot of good that can come out of social media. Yeah. There's a lot of good that could come out of, connecting with your friends via gaming or via phone or whatever the case is.
And I guess this is particularly now thinking about for parents, is that we've not been using phones all that long, in the great scheme of things. So my children, still it blows their mind that I didn't get a mobile phone until I left university. They're like, that's nuts. They want them when they're 11 or they're younger sometimes. And so we're, as adults, still navigating it for ourselves. So is it the same for parents as well about, what our own usage and what we're thinking about with using our phones?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big proponent of, the more self-awareness that we have as parents, as adults, about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's making us feel, what impact is it having on us mentally, emotionally, physically, then we can make choices based around that, right? We can take certain actions. We can learn to, to put our phone down and walk away from it. But when we're lacking that awareness or that reason of why, where's that compulsion to be on my phone at all hours? Where's that compulsion to be checking Instagram every 2 minutes?
You be looking over my shoulder, looking over my shoulder. I'm an addict. I'm terrible. When you get your screen report and it tells you how much time you've spent. And I think I'm all set to have conversations with my children about their screen time. And then I look at my own. And I guess that feeds, or can, if you're looking at the wrong stuff, or it can feed parental anxiety, I guess, because it's what you're being fed constantly through your social media.
And I agree with you. We are being fed a lot of stuff through social media. However, we can't blame it just on social media. We have a level of choice in the matter, right? It's up to us to choose whether we pay attention to it or not. Granted, obviously, media is very good at sort of throwing hooks out and trying to capture our attention with certain topics, and they know, that fear speaks, and that, of course, a little bit of, things that worry us are going to grab our attention. So they're good at that. But we have to remember we always have an element of choice.
Yeah.
And when we understand that for ourselves, then we can teach that to our children and teach them that they have a choice, that they don't have to do anything. They don't have to be on their phone all the time.
So listeners may or may not be aware, but I'm a mum of 6. So I have a full spectrum range of children and all sorts of ages. Now I'm fascinated around anxiety. So when parents start to worry, for parents, is there a time when it really peaks? When do you see in your profession that there is an age of children where it really peaks for the parents of those children?
Personally, I've noticed at every developmental stage.
Okay.
Right? Like the minute they start walking, we're worrying, right? Or the minute they're on solid foods or walking, and then when they start school, and every time there's a sort of a milestone to get to, that I'd say is when it really peaks. And and then obviously then as children become more independent in themselves, right? Then especially like teenagers, when they're wanting a little bit more freedom, then of course there's a lot of anxiety around how much freedom do we give them and that kind of thing.
So talking about the milestone then, let's talk about schools, because you said that, and that's a biggie, isn't it? Whether that's starting nursery, starting primary or even secondary school that we've experienced recently. Have you got any advice for parents on how they can manage their own anxiety when their children are starting school?
Yeah, absolutely. Starting school and any milestone, I think the first thing is to acknowledge and to realize that it has to do with grief.
Does it?
It does. We're grieving. We're grieving the loss of that particular version of our child or that stage of life where, they were so little and here they are starting school and we are having to let them go as much as they're having to let us go. And so, we're kind of in a mourning process. So we're going through a process of change, and both the child's changing and we're having to, our relationships changing. So there's a lot of grief and loss around that. So that's the first thing, is to acknowledge that it's normal to feel that. It takes time, obviously. And I would say as well, like any child starting school, look for those positives. Look for every time that child comes home happy. Yeah, they might be in tears when you're first dropping them off, but every child I know that gets dropped off in tears, by the time the parent picks them up, the child's had a great day.
Yeah, sure.
So everything's, short term. Things may seem really intense and really severe in the moment, but when we walk away, when we step away, and it's part of the adapting process.
Can our anxiety rub off on our kids? So can they be aware of when their parent is anxious?
Definitely.
Right.
Because children are wired, biologically wired to really be tuned into their parents. They're constantly reading our facial expressions, our body, our mood. And they do that because it's for their own survival. They have to know, is it safe to be around mom and dad? And this is why children try to adapt, to try to please us and But anxiety is something that is picked up by children.
So they pick it up. So how can you stop them picking it up? Do you have to have a demeanour? If you're watching us, I'm doing a very straight face. Is there something almost like you have to pull yourself together and what do you do so that children don't pick up that you're feeling anxious? Or do you need to do that?
Well, I mean, there's some times where if you're naturally feeling that and there's a genuine reason, then of course it's healthy for them to know, it's important for them. This is how they learn from us as well. It's dangerous to be around, heat and fire and there's certain things that they need to learn from us. But then we have to also as parents really, I guess, reflect on, how much of our anxiety is maybe overprotectiveness, is maybe unnecessary anxiety. And, that's where we have to do the work on ourselves as parents. We really have to reflect on that, particularly when we recognize that unknowingly what we might be doing is kind of sending the signal to our child that we don't trust them to make their own choices, or we don't trust them to look after themselves. We have to constantly be there to protect them. They can become then reliant on us. So we have to think about the kind of the consequences of being, too anxious, being too overprotective. And what is it that we want to teach them? What is the message that we want them to really understand? If what we want to build is a confident child, being constantly anxious around them isn't going to be helpful.
I'm going to put you on the spot now because I'm going to ask you if you've got a hack. Is there a way that if you are feeling anxious and you perhaps can have those rational thoughts and go, okay, I know that I've got to not let this rub off on them and I've got to let go of them to do this activity. Is there something that you can do to yourself to stop it coming across to your children? Is there a mental game that you can play with yourself or an activity that you can do to calm you down effectively? Is there something you can do?
Yeah, I mean, if you're catching your thought, right, if you're catching yourself in that moment, I mean, the first thing to do is really to take a deep breath, almost like just pause, really. And then is almost mentally to yourself, you have to find a way to reassure yourself. You have to almost like just say something like, I'm very, of course, it's natural to worry, but I don't want to pass this worry on to my kids. And if we can get into a habit of retraining ourselves, every time we catch ourselves with that, pause and then, think about what am I really wanting to communicate here to my children. It takes practice it's something that we do have to practice, but over time, like everything, it gets easier and we get better at it. We get more competent. Because I certainly have found that as a parent, when I do something for my children because I love them, it's easier to do it, right?
Yeah, because you love them. And that have a personal experience at the moment, this piece about letting go because your children want to do something that they've not done before. Now, my biggie at the moment is my teens wanting to get on the bus and just go to town. And they're looking at me as if to go, this is totally cool. This is what all my friends are doing. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, because my brain is saying something might happen to you. What if somebody strange talks to you on the bus? What if you get on the wrong bus? You know, what if something happens to the bus? Because we hear about bus crashes on social media and all sorts of stuff. How can we let them go and be unsupervised and not, while they're out, be having our own panic of anxiety at home?
Well, what I find helpful is to have boundaries.
Okay,
that's the first thing. Is to have clear boundaries. Like, this is, if you're going to do this, let's agree a set of rules or a boundary. Like, this is what this is what I'm prepared to let you do. For example, yeah, you're allowed to go on the bus, but we have to agree that there has to be a level of communication. You text me when you're on the bus. You text me when you get off the bus.
Okay, cool.
Things like that, because you're teaching them accountability doing that. You're also giving them a level of freedom. So what's the message you're sending? The message you're sending is, I trust you to do this, but but whilst we're learning this, whilst we're entering into this new kind of, where you're getting a little bit more freedom, this kind of new contract between us, we can think about it like that. We can think about contracting with our kids in a healthy way, like, right, okay, I'm going to agree to this, but there's going to be certain conditions because I need to be reassured that you're safe. And, and it seems to really work, that having the boundaries and making sure that you've got the communication channels that they can, reassure you when needed. Let's say, for example, though, that they forget to text you or that they forget to contact you, right? And of course, you're probably going to be worried and you get a hold of them. Then when they come home that day, you sit together and you assess it. Okay, what was it that was happening? Why did you find it difficult to remember? If you want to do this again, what can you do to remind yourself to be in contact? And then you have to, it's like problem solving together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. Because I think, particularly if they leave you and they go unsupervised, you almost feel like you're waving goodbye and then you don't hear from them again till they come back. And one of the things that I'm challenged by with my children is I also don't want to tell them the bad things that could happen to them. But I know it. And I like the fact that my children live in this. I want them to be safe. Yeah. But I also don't want to frighten them about the sorts of characters that, quite frankly, we know are out there. Because I still feel like they're babies. I don't want them to think that, I want them to trust, and I don't want them to be nervous of somebody in the park because mummy's told me that if somebody's walking in the park on their own, they're probably out to poach a child rather than and so that's my brain doing that. How can you get children to understand risk and effectively understand why you might be a little bit anxious, but without frightening them?
Well, you express that concern and you talk about the risks, but you don't have to paint such a detailed picture.
Sure.
Right? So just don't talk about the child snatcher kind of, but do mention that obviously as I'm giving you more freedom to go out, as you're wanting to, to have more freedom to go explore, let's talk about what are some of the risks, and then ask them, what do you think could be some of the things that you need to watch out for? That might reassure you because they might surprise you how much they already know. Mm-hmm. But let's just say that maybe they're not that aware about what's out there. Then there's a good conversation that you can have about, okay, well, do you understand that they're going to be people who, maybe don't have your best intention in mind? What do you do? And then you talk through scenarios. If somebody gets near you that makes you feel uncomfortable, what would you do? So we have to kind of coach them and prepare them, because of course it doesn't make sense to say, here you go out into the big wide world. We've not talked about any risks. We've not talked about what to do in case you are in danger, but just go out there and figure it out by yourself. We don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But neither do we want the other extreme where we're mollycoddling them, yeah. And, kind of like, insulating them from everything. It's about having conversations, psychologically preparing them, and talking through some, basic scenarios. If you feel uncomfortable, the first thing you do is ring me. Right? We're kind of giving them some solutions just in case anything happens.
I've got another example for you as to perhaps how we can help, or I want to ask your advice on how you can help manage it. You're just basically sorting my life out here, Jaimie. I always say with these podcasts, it's hugely self-indulgent because I do it purely for my... and hopefully these are other people's questions out there. But sometimes it's the worry of when our children get poorly. So we've all read or we've heard that, we've heard about... we have people on the podcast talking about sepsis, meningitis, diabetes. So perhaps when our child has a smaller ailment or is unwell, our anxiety can be, this is pretty bad. Or that we ring 111 and a professional says, we need you to bring your child to A&E, and parents report this. How on earth, when you're in that moment of really worrying about your children's well-being, how can you bring yourself back to going, I've got this and I'm in control of it? Is that possible? Can you do it?
I think anything's possible personally.
Right.
And I think especially when, we have to really be conscious about what message am I sending. I might genuinely be very anxious, but what message am I sending that to my child who's already not feeling well? We may be making them worry about their own health as well. So we really have to pull ourselves together, for our child's sake. We have to really kind of, again, take that pause, take that deep breath, and have a little chat with ourselves, and be like, right, okay, pull yourself together. You got to do this for your, I'm going to do this for my child. I want to communicate to them that they're going to be okay. Right? Even if you yourself don't feel 100% that you're okay, but that message has to come across to them. You have to give them the confidence that you believe that they're going to be okay. Because what we think matters to our children.
Yeah, massively.
And it's going to facilitate the healing process for that child if they feel that they're going to be okay, rather than if they're thinking, well, oh, mommy's still worried, or dad is worried, or my parent is really worried about me. We have to be able to, right? To be really aware of what we're communicating at every moment with our child.
So I think for every parent, every carer listening, everybody acknowledges there's some anxiety because we're fueled with stuff. You've talked about that. But there might be people listening where it's a bit more consuming than that. What are the signs that people should be aware of if their anxiety is perhaps edging up to a level that perhaps they need some... What are there signs where perhaps someone needs some more professional help?
Well, I would say that it has to... The minute it's impacting your health, mental or physical health, right? Where you're constantly stressed, or you're feeling a lot of physical symptoms that are uncomfortable on a more regular basis. And also you can see the impact that anxiety has on you when you're... not just physically, but just in terms of you controlling behavior. If you're becoming very controlling and it's impacting your relationships, then that's a sign that there's a problem, because often anxiety and control go hand in hand. So you might feel that if your relationships are constantly in tension and you're constantly telling people off, or you're constantly trying to be very protective or trying to control everything, that's exhausting. So you're going to be feeling exhausted, you're going to be feeling tense. And that's a sign that you probably would benefit from speaking to someone who can help you sort of shed some of that worry, just put things in perspective in a way that can help you feel more in control of your own self, because that's what's happening. And with anxiety, we're feeling that we're out of control, that things are out of our hands, things are out of our control. And then what we're trying to do is trying to control as much as possible to feel safe. But that doesn't ever work. It doesn't work to try to control everything, because nothing can truly ever be, we can't control other people. We can't control, so we have to the only thing we have control over is our own minds, the way we think, our own behavior in ourselves. And when we feel that we are, sort of not in conflict internally, when we can find a way of thinking about things and seeing things from a perspective that makes us feel calmer, then that anxiety eventually can just regulate itself.
So getting some professional help
definitely
can be, and I'm going to ask you in a moment about where we can go for professional support, but I also was interested to see whether it's possible to spot it in your friends or your social circle or your family, and whether you can see signs that somebody else is perhaps perhaps, for want of a better phrase, crippled with anxiety, is there ways that you can spot it in other people?
Yeah, I think it's easy to spot it in other people. They're perhaps overly consumed with a particular thought or a particular behavior. So, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is something that's easy to spot, isn't it? When people have to have everything in a particular way, or do do a certain ritual before they can feel safe or feel like they can leave the house. But, just anybody who's obsessing over a particular topic, obsessing over their children, obsessing over how the housework has to be done a particular way, or, any of those signs where there's a little bit of an extremeness in behavior or an extremeness in that kind of obsession is usually a sign that that person's out of balance, that the anxiety is probably getting the better of them. And then, as a concerned and caring friend or relative, it's asking them about, how do you manage? You seem worried a lot of the time. How do you cope? Do you feel sometimes that maybe it's too much? And really, in a very gentle way, then through that kind of conversation, you can urge them that, actually, you don't have to live like this. You can get some support. And there are places where you can get that support.
So let's talk about those places then, because there will be people listening that say, either for themselves or for one of their friends or family, that they say, actually, I do need this signposting, because perhaps some of the things that you've talked about today can be preventing them from feeling like they're having a full life with their children. Where do you go if you need some support with anxiety?
So I would say the first place sometimes we need to research things for ourselves a little bit, So if you're thinking you're having problems with anxiety, there's a lot of online resources that you can look at, and just, you can even take a little online kind of quiz or something just to see how bad your levels of anxiety are. So if you feel comfortable as a first step, that's probably a good place. And some of the good websites, I would say, there's familylives.org.uk. That's a good one, because it talks about all the different stages of parenting, the stages that children go through and parenting. There's a lot of information, advice, and support.
Right.
About, to help parents through those different stages. But you can go to mind.org as well. Mind is a website that's all about the mental health. So if you want to know more about anxiety in general, that's a good place to be. And another one is anxietyuk.org as well, which is all about anxiety. So that's maybe a good place to do a little bit of research for yourself or for a relative. Is this anxiety? I would say also, of course, speak to your GP. Really important, because your GP will be able to kind of guide you in terms of, is this an anxiety disorder? Is it possible that this anxiety needs treating or it needs dealing with? Speaking to your GP, you will probably get a referral. If the GP identifies that it could be an anxiety disorder, and then you're likely to speak to a psychologist. You might get prescribed medication to ease your anxiety. So medication for anxiety can be helpful, can take the edge off for a lot of people, and it can help people feel a little bit calmer. So that's always an option, but it's not for everyone. So it's something that is really up to the individual to discuss with the GP and to try it out. But I would say, ultimately, medication may take the edge off, but it doesn't make it go away.
Okay.
So anxiety, especially in its extreme form, is something that needs to be dealt with. It's a psychological issue that needs to be treated psychologically, which means you need to adjust the way you're thinking. You need to adjust your beliefs. You need to analyze aspects of that are basically sub-programs that are running inside of us that basically may need editing. And so that means that you need professional help to do that.
And are there lots of professionals out there? I know that you're ready to talk to anybody that wants to talk to you, but if wherever people listening from, is there good accessible support for counselling or therapy around having anxiety?
Absolutely.
Is that there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's plenty. I think there's plenty. I know that if you go through the NHS, it's a bit more limited.
Okay.
But still, there is support available. You might have to be on a waiting list for a bit, but depending on where you're based and where you're listening to. But there are other ways that you can access it. You can access it through if you've got private medical insurance, oftentimes there's a clause, or you can access it that way. Or and people who are employed, and their employer often provide an employee assistance program.
Okay.
So employee assistance programs are basically on telephone counselling or sometimes video counselling. So you can access it that way. You can access it through your private medical. You can access it privately. There's different organizations. You can try, again, the BACP, which is, and I'm sure that you can link that as well.
We'll share all your links today in our show notes so that everybody's got those lists to look
but
at.
you can find your own counsellor that way based on your location and what it is you're looking for, or the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, the NCPS also.
We'll make sure all these links are available for everybody listening today. So it's not... that you've just got to live with this. This is something that is manageable in the sense of you can help to self-manage, but then there is professional support if you need that intervention to help you to manage.
Absolutely, and it's really important to seek that support. And it's because this is parental anxiety we're talking about.
Yeah,
and I think sometimes it's easy to seek help when we know we're doing it to improve our relationship with our children, to really, we want to get across the message that we do live in a safe world.
Great.
When we are intuitively tuned in and when we are listening, and paying attention to the red flags, of course, we can anyone can keep themselves safe. We're all capable of that.
So on the subject of parental anxiety, we always ask all of our guests on this podcast to share their top tip or their one piece of advice that they would want people to take away from listening to our Family Health podcast today. What would be your top piece of advice on parental anxiety?
One top piece of advice. I would say, trust your intuition as a parent.
Okay.
Our intuition is our navigational system, and our intuition is rarely wrong. But oftentimes we ignore that little voice or that gut feeling because our mind, again, overthinks things. And sometimes so we have to learn to distinguish between our intuition and our overthinking mind sometimes. But when we trust that feeling, that sense that actually, when I really check in with myself, is this really a problem? Then we tend to feel that internal reassurance. We know that we're on the right track. And I think an intuitive parent is a parent that's very tuned into their own self, and they're tuned in very well to their child as well. So always trust your intuition. And, whether it be about your own health or your child's health, just listen to that and you can't go wrong.
Jaimie, this is absolutely fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll put all the links that Jaimie shared with us today in the show notes. And with children, for myself, very selfishly for me today, ranging from 5 to 13, there's so many takeaways that I've got there and things that going to challenge my own thoughts a little bit, which is great. So thank you for joining us on the Family Health podcast today. You've been listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. We do encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. You can do that via your regular podcast channel. And if you want to see what Jaimie looks like, you've heard her voice, you want to know what she looks like, then you can watch us via the Mini First Aid Family Health podcast YouTube channel. We'll share all the links for that. And if you do subscribe to the podcast, it means that you'll be able to be notified of the next episode as and when it's ready. And if you follow Mini First Aid on all of our socials, we can keep you up to date with everything that's happening in the realm of family health. And my final question for our listeners today, it's a request really more than a question, is to say that if you have a particular subject that you would love to hear more on, please get in touch, because we would love to hear from you, because you really help us design what our parents out there want to listen to, what families want to know about. And we know that this was a big topic for a lot of people, was parental anxiety. So Jaimie, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I hope you found our podcast really useful and informative. If you want to know more about Mini First Aid classes, courses, qualification courses or first aid supplies, please do visit minifirstaid.co.uk or look us up on all your favourite social platforms at Mini First Aid. I take Savlon Scar Prevention Gel everywhere with me so that I am always prepared for the many little and sometimes bigger accidents that my kids encounter. Thank you again to Savlon Scar Prevention Gel for sponsoring Series 3 of the Family Health Podcast.